The recording room was cold and quiet. 3 young journalists sat behind their equipment, their scales shining under the soft lights. They had traveled far to reach this small house on the edge of the old capital city. They had come to meet a legend. Walked slowly into the room. He was old now, very old. His scales had lost their color and turned gray like stone. His left eye was gone, replaced by a dark patch of tissue. He moved with difficulty, each step careful and measured. But when he sat down in the chair across from the journalists, his remaining eye was sharp and clear. "You want to hear about the humans," he said. It was not a question. The lead journalist, a young female named, nodded her head. "Yes, honored veteran. The great galactic conflict ended 40 cycles ago, but so few survivors remain. We want to preserve your memories for future generations." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was dry and hollow. "Preserve my memories," he repeated. "You want stories of glory and victory. You want tales of brave warriors fighting against a primitive enemy." He leaned forward, and the journalists pulled back without meaning to. There was something in his eye that made them afraid. "I will tell you the truth instead," said. "And the truth is that we lost completely, and we deserve to lose." Exchanged looks with her colleagues. This was not what they had expected. The official history said the war had ended in a negotiated peace. It said they had chosen to stop fighting because continued war served no purpose. "The official history is a lie," said, as if reading her thoughts. "We surrendered, we begged them to stop, and they showed us mercy we did not deserve." He settled back in his chair and closed his eye for a moment. When he opened it again, he seemed to be looking at something far away, something the journalists could not see. "It began on a world called 7, he said. "I was young then, strong, proud. I commanded a battalion of 3,000 warriors, the finest soldiers in the Dominion. We had conquered 17 worlds before 7. We had never known defeat." The journalists listened in silence. The recording equipment hummed softly. "Intelligence told us that 7 was a small human colony, perhaps 50,000 civilians, a tiny military presence. We expected to take the world in 2 days and move on to the next target." His claws tightened on the arms of his chair. "We were fools." He described the landing. 3,000 warriors in full battle armor, armed with plasma rifles and supported by heavy vehicles. They had descended on the main settlement like a storm, expecting the humans to flee or surrender. Instead, the humans fought. Every street became a battlefield. Every building became a fortress. Civilians who should have run instead picked up weapons and stood beside their soldiers. They pushed forward, but every meter cost them lives. "By the end of the first day, we had lost 200 warriors," said. 200. Against a force we estimated at less than 5,000 defenders, but we pushed forward. We had numbers on our side. We had superior technology. We would win. On the third day, they cornered a small human unit in an old industrial facility on the edge of the settlement. Intelligence said there were no more than 40 humans inside. They were cut off from reinforcements. They had no escape route. They were out of heavy weapons. The commander at the scene sent a message offering surrender. The terms were simple. "Lay down your weapons and you will be taken as prisoners. Resist and you will be destroyed." The response came from a human voice. It was the voice of a man named Jake Collins, a sergeant in the Human Colonial Defense Force. "Come and get us," he said, and then he laughed. Remembered that laugh. He heard it in his nightmares still. "We attacked," he said. 500 warriors against 40 humans in a crumbling building. It should have been over in minutes. It took 3 hours. When it was finished, 300 warriors were dead or wounded. The building was reduced to rubble, and Jake Collins was still alive, still fighting, still laughing. He had rigged the building with traps, explosives hidden in walls, trip wires connected to grenades, false floors that collapsed into pits filled with sharpened metal. He had turned a simple structure into a maze of death. We learned later that Collins had been a construction worker before the war, said. He built houses. He was not even a professional soldier, but he understood how buildings work, and he used that knowledge to kill us. They brought in heavy weapons and reduced the building to dust. They were certain that nothing could survive. When the smoke cleared, they moved in to confirm the kills. Collins and 17 surviving humans attacked them from the sewers beneath the rubble. They had escaped through tunnels dug during the battle. They had no food, no water, no ammunition. They fought with knives and rocks in their bare hands. I saw a human woman kill 2 of my soldiers with a piece of broken pipe, said. His voice was quiet now. She was bleeding from a wound in her side. She could barely stand, but she kept fighting until we put her down. And even then, even as she died, she looked at me with such hatred that I felt my courage fail. The battle for that one building lasted 19 days. Not because the humans were strong enough to hold it, but because they refused to stop fighting. Every time the thought they had won, the humans would appear somewhere else, attack from a new direction, and disappear again. Collins became a legend among both sides. They called him the ghost of. They said he could not be killed. They said he was not human at all, but some kind of demon sent to punish them. He was just a man, said. That was the worst part. He was just a man who refused to accept defeat, who refused to understand that he was supposed to die. The journalist sat in stunned silence, finally spoke. What happened to Collins? Smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. He survived. By the time reinforcements arrived for the humans, my battalion of 3,000 warriors had been reduced to less than 400, and Collins walked out of the ruins with 11 survivors, carrying his wounded on his back. He leaned forward again. That was my first lesson about humans. They do not fight to win. They do not fight for glory. They fight because something inside them refuses to stop, and that makes them more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced. The journalists looked at each other. They had wanted stories of the war. Now they were not sure they wanted to hear more. But was not finished. He had only begun, paused to drink water from a simple cup. His old hands trembled slightly as he lifted it to his mouth. The journalists waited, not daring to break the silence. You want to know more about 7, he said finally. You want to understand how 40 humans held back 3,000 warriors for 19 days. He set down the cup and folded his claws together. The answer is simple. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like animals, like cornered beasts who knew they were going to die and decided to take as many of us with them as possible. After the first building was destroyed, Collins and his remaining soldiers retreated to a water treatment facility on the western edge of the settlement. It was a large complex with thick concrete walls and underground storage tanks. Not a fortress, but better than fighting in the open. They surrounded the facility within hours. They cut power to the building. They blocked all roads and sealed the sewers. They brought in 10 times the forces they had used before. Nothing would escape this time. We gave them one final chance to surrender, said. Collins responded by shooting our messenger. The siege began at dawn on the 4th day. They advanced from all directions at once, overwhelming force against a tiny enemy. They expected the humans to fall back, to conserve their strength, to make a final stand in the central building. Instead, the humans attacked. They burst from hidden positions throughout the complex, firing from windows, from rooftops, from holes in the ground. They had spent the night preparing, turning every corner into an ambush point. The advance stumbled and stalled. There was a young woman named Amy, said. She was 23 years old. Before the war, she had been a student studying medicine. When the invasion began, she joined the Colonial Defense Force. She had been in combat for only 6 weeks. Was not a skilled shooter. She was not trained in hand-to-hand combat, but she had one talent that made her valuable beyond measure. She could move without being seen. We called her the Shadow, said. Every night she would slip through our lines. We never saw her coming. We never heard her. We only found the bodies in the morning. Would crawl through the darkness for hours, moving so slowly that even thermal sensors could not detect her. She would find a sleeping soldier or a guard who had become careless, and then she would strike. In 19 days, killed 37 warriors. She used a combat knife that she had taken from a fallen soldier. When the knife became dull, she used wire. When the wire broke, she used her hands. She strangled an officer with his own equipment cables and took his supplies back to the besieged facility. She never made a sound, said. Our soldiers began to fear the night. They would huddle together, jumping at shadows. Some refused to take guard duty alone. They said the darkness itself was hunting them. They responded by increasing patrols, setting traps, and using advanced detection equipment. Adapted. She learned to avoid the traps. She learned to blind the sensors. She learned to kill silently and disappear before the bodies were discovered. But was only one part of the human defense. The rest of Colin's soldiers were just as determined, just as resourceful. They had almost no ammunition left by the 8th day. The humans began making their own weapons. They built bombs from cleaning chemicals stored in the facility. They created traps from broken machinery. They sharpened pieces of metal into blades and attached them to poles to make spears. They were supposed to be a modern military force, said. They had spacecraft and energy weapons and advanced technology, but when they ran out of technology, they went backward. They became primitives, and somehow that made them more dangerous. The soldiers had been trained to fight enemies with similar weapons and tactics. They did not know how to fight enemies who attacked with clubs and rocks and fire. They did not know how to fight enemies who set themselves on fire and ran into positions to cause chaos. One human soldier wrapped himself in fuel-soaked cloth and charged our forward command post, said quietly. He was screaming as he burned. He killed 11 of our officers before he finally died. His name was Peter Santos. He was 19 years old. The journalists were pale now. Hands shook as she adjusted her recording equipment. Spoke of another human who haunted his memories. His name was Chris, and he was a medic. He wore no armor and carried no weapons except a small pistol for self-defense. His job was to save lives, not take them. But when the broke through the western wall on the 12th day, was the only thing standing between them and the wounded humans in the medical bay. He fought like a demon, said. He used his medical tools as weapons. He stabbed a warrior through the eye with a surgical instrument. He broke another's neck with his bare hands. He picked up a fallen plasma rifle and held the doorway for 20 minutes until reinforcements arrived. Touched the tissue where his eye had been. I was one of the warriors who attacked the medical bay. Is the one who took my eye. He threw a chemical in my face, something meant to clean wounds. It burned like fire. I fell back screaming, and by the time I could see again, the attack had failed. 12 warriors had entered the medical bay. None of them came out alive. The strange thing, said, was that after the battle continued treating his patients. He had just killed 12 warriors. His hands were covered in blood. And then he sat down beside a wounded soldier and began stitching a wound as if nothing had happened. The commanders did not understand. Medics were supposed to be non-combatants. Healers were supposed to be gentle. In culture, those who saved lives and those who took lives were separate classes. They did not mix. But humans were different. A human healer would kill to protect his patients. A human teacher would fight to protect her students. A human farmer would die to protect his family. They have no true non-combatants, said. Every human is a potential warrior. Every human carries the capacity for violence inside them. They choose to suppress it most of the time. But when they need it, when their loved ones are threatened, it comes out. On the 19th day, human reinforcements finally broke through the lines. Fresh soldiers in full armor, with heavy weapons and air support. They had fought their way across the continent to reach the besieged facility. Collins walked out to meet them with 11 survivors. He was carrying 3 wounded soldiers on a makeshift stretcher. Was beside him, her knife still in her hand, her eyes watching the shadows out of habit. Followed, supporting a soldier who had lost a leg. They should have been broken, said. They should have been shells of human beings traumatized and destroyed, but they walked out with their heads high. And Collins, that madman, he was smiling. The Battle of Seven was a minor engagement in the larger war. A small colony, a few thousand defenders, a siege that lasted less than 3 weeks, but it changed everything. Because word of the siege spread through the forces, soldiers began to whisper about the humans who could not be killed, about the woman who hunted in the darkness, about the healer who fought like a warrior, about the sergeant who laughed at death. Fear is a weapon, and the humans had learned to use it well. After 7, our soldiers hesitated, said. They advanced more slowly. They looked over their shoulders. They jumped at shadows, and that hesitation cost us more than any battle ever could. He looked at the journalists with his remaining eye. That was my second lesson about humans. Their true weapon is not their technology or their numbers. Their true weapon is the fire that burns inside them, and that fire cannot be extinguished. Young journalist named leaned forward in her seat. Her scales had lost some of their color as she listened to stories, but she was determined to continue. The official records mention a human commander who caused significant damage to our supply lines, she said. Someone called the grandmother. Can you tell us about her? His claws tightened on his chair. For a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more afraid. Her name was Nancy Shaw, he said. She was a lieutenant commander in the human navy, and she was the most terrifying being I have ever encountered. Shaw was 63 years old when the war began. In human terms, she was approaching the end of her military career. She had served for 40 years, mostly in administrative positions and training assignments. She had never commanded a ship in combat. She had never fired a weapon in anger. When they invaded, Shaw was teaching navigation at a human military academy. She should have been evacuated with the other instructors. Instead, she requested active duty. The human command did not know what to do with her, said. She was too old for frontline service, too experienced to waste on guard duty. So they gave her a small ship and told her to do whatever she could. The ship was called the Silent Promise. It was a stealth frigate, old and outdated by human standards. Its weapons were weak. Its shields were thin. In a direct fight against any vessel, it would be destroyed in minutes. Shaw never fought a direct fight. She understood something that our commanders did not, said. Wars are not won by killing soldiers. Wars are won by breaking the systems that support those soldiers: food, fuel, communication, morale. The Silent Promise slipped behind lines and began hunting. Not warships, not military bases. Shaw hunted supply convoys. She attacked food shipments heading to the front lines. She destroyed fuel transports in deep space. She ambushed communication relays and listening posts. She struck quickly, silently, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. At first we did not even know she existed, said. Ships simply disappeared. Convoys never arrived. We blamed mechanical failures. We blamed navigation errors. We blamed everything except the truth. The truth was that a single old woman in a broken-down ship was slowly strangling the war effort. Shaw was methodical. She studied shipping routes and learned their patterns. She identified the most vulnerable points and struck them repeatedly. She attacked the same routes so often that convoys began avoiding them, forcing them to take longer paths and waste more fuel. Within 2 cycles, our supply situation became critical, said. Entire fleets were stranded without fuel. Soldiers on the front lines went hungry. Commanders could not reach high command because our communication network was full of holes. They finally realized that a single enemy ship was responsible. They sent hunters to find and destroy the Silent Promise, fast attack vessels, stealth ships of their own, the best trackers in the fleet. Shaw destroyed them one by one. She laid traps, said. She would attack a convoy and then wait nearby, hidden in an asteroid field or the shadow of a moon. When our hunters came looking for her, she would ambush them. She used their own tactics against them. They sent larger ships. Shaw avoided them and continued hitting soft targets. They sent faster ships. Shaw outmaneuvered them. They sent ships with better sensors. Shaw found ways to blind them. We could not understand how she was doing it, said. Later, we learned that she had spent 40 years studying technology. She knew our sensors better than we did. She knew exactly how to appear invisible to them. Shaw became an obsession for command. They diverted hundreds of ships to hunt her. They offered enormous rewards for her capture. They spread propaganda saying she was already dead. But the attacks continued, and the name Grandmother began to spread through the fleet. Our soldiers called her that because of her age, explained. In culture, elders are honored and cared for. They do not fight. They do not kill. The idea of an old woman causing such destruction was disturbing. Shaw did not just destroy ships, she destroyed minds. She would broadcast messages on frequencies before her attacks. Sometimes she would read poetry in her calm, quiet voice. Sometimes she would list the names of ships she had destroyed. Sometimes she would simply say, "The grandmother is watching." Our soldiers became paranoid, said. They saw her everywhere, every shadow, every sensor glitch, every unexplained signal. They stopped sleeping. They made mistakes. And when they made mistakes, Shaw was there to take advantage. After 4 cycles, they finally cornered the Silent Promise. A massive fleet surrounded her near a gas giant called 4. Her ship was damaged, leaking atmosphere, barely functioning. She had no escape route, no reinforcements, no hope. The commander sent a message demanding her surrender. He promised fair treatment if she came peacefully. He promised a quick death if she did not. Shaw's response was broadcast on every frequency. Her voice was calm and clear, without fear or anger. "I have been waiting for you," she said. Closed his eye. What happened next is still classified by both governments. I was not there, but I spoke to survivors afterward, and what they told me. He shook his head slowly. Shaw had spent her final days preparing. She knew she could not escape. She knew she would die, so she decided to make her death count. She had rigged her ship's reactor to overload in a specific way. Instead of a simple explosion, it would create an electromagnetic pulse that would disable every ship within 10,000 kilometers. She had also transmitted all the intelligence she had gathered, every fleet position, communication code, and supply route to human command. The information would take time to reach them, but when it did, it would be devastating. And she had one more surprise. In the days before she was cornered, Shaw had visited every supply cache within 3 sectors. She had left hidden bombs in each one, set to detonate on a timer. When they boarded her ship, Shaw was sitting in her command chair, smiling. She welcomed them like guests in her home. She offered them tea, a human custom that confused the boarding party completely. She talked to them for 20 minutes, said. She told them stories about her, she showed them pictures, she asked about their families, and the whole time the timer was counting down. The explosion destroyed 4 capital ships and damaged a dozen more. The electromagnetic pulse disabled another 20. And when the supply caches began detonating across 3 sectors, the entire campaign in that region collapsed. Shaw died instantly. She was 67 years old. We called her the grandmother of ashes after that, said, because everywhere she touched, only ashes remained. The journalist sat in stunned silence. His recording equipment hummed softly. I did not meet her in person, said, but she haunted me anyway. Every supply delay, every empty fuel tank, every missed communication, I thought of her. She was dead, but her work lived on. He looked at the journalists with his remaining eye. That was my third lesson about humans. They are not afraid of death. They do not see it as an end. They see it as an opportunity, a final chance to strike at their enemies. He paused, remembering. And that makes them impossible to defeat, because you can kill a human, but you cannot kill what they leave behind. The story of Nancy Shaw spread through the fleet faster than any propaganda. Young soldiers told it to each other in whispers. Officers used it as a warning, and somewhere in the darkness of space, humans were listening. They knew the power of stories, and they used that power well. The journalists expected more stories of death and destruction. They had heard about the siege. They had heard about the grandmother. They were prepared for tales of human violence and cruelty. What told them next was something they never expected. "You want to know what truly terrified us about humans?" he asked. "It was not their weapons. It was not their determination. It was not their willingness to die." He leaned forward, his remaining eye fixed on the journalists. "It was their mercy." The Battle of Prime happened in the 7th cycle of the war. It was one of the largest engagements in the conflict, with over 100 ships on each side and ground forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Was a battalion commander by then. He had learned from 7. He had adapted his tactics. He was no longer the arrogant young officer who had underestimated his enemy. But Prime was different from any battle he had experienced. The humans were not fighting to hold territory or protect civilians. They were fighting to break the military completely. "They came at us with everything," said. "Ships, soldiers, weapons we had never seen before. They had learned from the first years of the war. They knew our weaknesses, and they exploited every single one." The battle lasted for 6 days. By the end, the forces were shattered. Ships drifted dead in space. Armies were scattered across the planet's surface. Command structures had collapsed. Communication networks were destroyed. Was badly wounded on the 4th day. An explosion had thrown him against a wall, breaking several bones and damaging his internal organs. His soldiers tried to carry him to safety, but human forces were everywhere. In the chaos, he was separated from his unit. He remembered crawling through the rubble of a destroyed city. He remembered the taste of blood in his mouth and the sound of distant explosions. He remembered thinking that he was going to die alone in the ruins of a world he had tried to conquer. Then he heard footsteps. A human soldier appeared through the dust and smoke. He was young, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair and tired eyes. He wore the uniform of a colonial infantry unit. His name, would later learn, was Corporal Ben Torres. Torres looked at the wounded commander. He raised his rifle, closed his eye, and waited for death. It did not come. "Why?" asked the journalists. "Why did he not shoot me? I was his enemy. I had killed his people. I had burned his colonies. By every law of war, by every right of vengeance, he should have ended my life." Instead, Torres lowered his weapon. He knelt beside and examined his wounds. He pulled out a medical kit and began treating the injuries. "I asked him the same question," said. "I asked him why he was helping me. Do you know what he said?" The journalists shook their heads. "He said, because you need help." That was all. Nothing about the war, nothing about revenge or justice. Simply because I needed help, he helped me. Torres stopped the bleeding. He sets broken bones as best he could. He gave him water and painkillers from his own supplies. And then he carried the commander, a being 3 times his weight, across 2 kilometers of ruined city to a human field hospital. "I thought I was being taken to a prison," said, "or an interrogation center, or an execution ground. Instead, I was taken to a place of healing." The field hospital was chaos. Human soldiers lay on beds and stretchers, wounded and dying. Doctors and nurses rushed from patient to patient, trying to save as many as possible. The smell of blood and medicine filled the air. But there were also in the hospital wounded enemies captured during the battle, and human doctors were treating them alongside their own soldiers. I could not understand, said. These humans had every reason to hate us. We had invaded their worlds. We had killed their families. We had burned their cities, and yet they were saving our lives. A human doctor named Sandra Cole took charge of his case. She was exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and blood on her coat. She had been working for 3 days without sleep, and yet she treated the commander with the same care she gave to her own people. She performed surgery to repair his internal damage. She set his bones properly and wrapped them in casts. She gave him medicine for the pain and fluids to replace what he had lost. She checked on him every few hours, adjusting his treatment as needed. I asked her the same question I had asked Tors, said, "Why are you helping me? Why are you healing your enemy?" Dr. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that would never forget. "Because I swore an oath to heal the sick and injured, not the sick and injured who happen to be on my side, all of them, even you." Spent 3 weeks in that field hospital. He watched human doctors save lives day after day. He watched human nurses comfort soldiers who were afraid and in pain. He watched human soldiers share their food with prisoners. Not all of them were kind, he admitted. Some humans hated us and they made their hatred known, but they were the exception, not the rule. Most of them simply treated us like people. When was well enough to be moved, he was transferred to a prisoner of war camp. He expected harsh conditions, forced labor, perhaps torture for information. What he found was almost insulting in its ordinariness. The camp was clean and well organized. Prisoners received regular meals, medical care, and exercise. They were allowed to practice their religion and maintain their culture. They were treated according to human laws of war, which guaranteed basic rights even to enemies. "We did not treat human prisoners the same way," said quietly. "I will not describe what we did, but it was not kind, it was not merciful, it was what we thought war required." The humans knew what happened to their captured soldiers. They had found camps. They had seen the bodies. They had every reason to respond in kind. They chose not to. "That terrified us more than any weapon," said. "A species that could show such violence and such compassion in equal measure. A species that could kill without hesitation and heal without condition. We could not predict them. We could not understand them." In culture, mercy was weakness. Compassion was something you showed to family and friends, not to enemies. The idea of healing someone who had tried to kill you was not just strange, it was insane. But humans did not see it that way. For them, violence and kindness were not opposites. They were different tools to be used for different purposes. You killed when killing was necessary. You healed when healing was necessary. And sometimes you did both in the same hour. Ben Tors killed 17 soldiers in the battle before he found me, said. I learned that later. He was an efficient and deadly warrior, and yet he carried a wounded enemy to safety because it was the right thing to do. Looked at the journalists. His remaining eye was wet. That was my 4th lesson about humans. Their capacity for destruction is matched only by their capacity for compassion. They can burn your cities and then rebuild them. They can kill your soldiers and then heal your wounded. They can hate you and love you in the same moment. He paused, remembering. And that makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy, because you never know which side of them you will see next. Tors came to visit in the prisoner camp several times. They talked about their families, their homes, their hopes for the future. They became something that should have been impossible. They became friends. I do not expect you to understand, told the journalists. I do not fully understand it myself, but Ben Tors saved my life and then he treated me like a person instead of a monster. He showed me that humans are not demons. They are simply different. He smiled, and it was a sad smile. Different in ways that make them terrifying, and different in ways that give me hope. The recording session had lasted for hours. The three journalists were exhausted, but they sensed that had one more story to tell, the most important one of all. "You have heard about battles and soldiers," the old veteran said. "You have heard about human violence and human mercy, but you have not heard why we surrendered." He settled back in his chair and looked at something beyond the walls of the room, something in the past. "The official history says we negotiated a peace because continued fighting served no purpose. That is a lie. We surrendered because we were afraid. We surrendered because we finally understood what we had awakened." In the 9th cycle of the war, the High Command made a decision. The war was not going well. Human resistance had proven stronger than expected. Supply lines were stretched thin. Morale among the soldiers was crumbling. They decided to send a message so brutal that it would break human will to fight. The target was a world called New Providence. It was a colony of 2.3 million humans, mostly civilians. Farmers, teachers, children, people who had nothing to do with the war except being born on the wrong side. "I was not part of the fleet that attacked New Providence," said, "but I heard the reports afterward. They did not just bomb the colony, they destroyed it completely. Every city, every town, every settlement, nothing was left alive." The broadcast images of the destruction across human communication networks. They wanted humans to see what happened to those who resisted. They wanted humans to understand that continued resistance would mean more deaths, more destruction, more colonies reduced to ash. They expected humans to surrender. They expected humans to beg for peace. They expected the war to end. Instead, something changed. Within one day of the broadcast, human recruitment centers were overwhelmed, said. Civilians who had never held a weapon demanded to join the military. Scientists abandoned peaceful research to work on weapons. Artists created songs and images that united humans across 100 worlds. They had expected to break human morale. Instead, they had unified it. Every political dispute, every cultural difference, every old grudge was forgotten. Humanity spoke with one voice. And that voice said, "Never again." "We did not understand at first," said. "We thought it was temporary madness, a brief surge of emotion that would fade. But it did not fade. It grew stronger." Within one cycle, humans had mobilized a fleet 3 times larger than anything intelligence had predicted. Factories that had been producing civilian goods were converted to military production overnight. Research programs that had been developing medicine and communication technology were redirected to create new weapons. "They built ships faster than we could destroy them," said. "They trained soldiers faster than we could kill them." It was as if the attack on New Providence had unlocked something inside them, something ancient and terrible. But the turning point came with a single message. It was sent by Admiral Lisa, the commander of human forces in the sector where New Providence had been destroyed. It was broadcast on every frequency, translated into every dialect. Recited the message from memory. He had heard it 1,000 times. Every veteran had. "People of the Dominion," the message began. "You have made a mistake, not a tactical mistake, not a strategic mistake, an existential mistake." His voice was calm and steady. There was no anger in it, no threats, just a simple statement of fact. For generations, humanity has tried to forget what we are capable of. We have built societies dedicated to peace. We have created art and music and science. We have reached for the stars not to conquer but to explore. We have tried, with varying success, to be better than our ancestors. Paused, the journalists leaned forward, sensing the weight of what was coming. "You have made us remember," continued. "You have reminded us of what we are when we stop trying to be better. You have shown us that peace is not possible with those who slaughter children. And so we will stop trying to be peaceful. The message continued for another minute, described what humanity would do next, not in terms of threats or promises, but in terms of history. She talked about human wars. She talked about weapons humans had created and then sworn never to use again. She talked about the darkness that lived inside every human heart. We locked that darkness away, she said. We were afraid of it. We built entire civilizations to keep it contained, but you have broken the locks. You have opened the door, and now you will see what comes out. Stopped reciting. His voice was barely a whisper. She was not threatening us, he said. She was warning us. There is a difference. Threats are about what you want to do. Warnings are about what you cannot stop. The High Command did not take the message seriously at first. Humans were emotional creatures, they said. This was just posturing. The war would continue as before. But then the attacks began. Human fleets struck worlds with a fury that had never been seen before. They did not just defeat enemy forces. They annihilated them. Ships were not disabled and captured. They were destroyed completely. Bases were not occupied. They were reduced to craters. They showed no mercy, said. Not cruelty, not torture. They did not play with their enemies as some species do. They simply killed, efficiently, completely, without hesitation or remorse. They fought back. They won some battles, but for every ship they destroyed, humans built 2 more. For every soldier they killed, humans trained 10 more. The war became a tide that could not be stopped. And then came the new weapons. I will not describe them, said. The details are still classified, but I will tell you this. Humans are very, very good at finding ways to kill. They had been holding back. They had been fighting with one hand tied behind their back. When they stopped holding back, he trailed off, unable to continue. The journalists waited in silence. The High Council met in secret, finally said. They reviewed the intelligence. They calculated the projections. They looked at what humanity was becoming and what it would do if the war continued. He looked at the journalists with his remaining eye. We still had more ships. We still had more soldiers. We still had more resources. By every measure, we could have continued fighting. But the Council understood something that pure numbers could not show. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Humanity was not a species that waged war. Humanity was a species that had learned to stop waging war. They had spent centuries building chains to bind themselves, to control the violence that lived inside them, and we had broken those chains. The Council realized that continued war would not lead to victory. It would lead to extinction, not because humans wanted to destroy them, but because humans, once unleashed, might not be able to stop. They surrendered to protect us, said. Not the humans, us. The Council surrendered because they understood that the alternative was annihilation. The war ended 3 days after the Council's decision. Human forces accepted the surrender with the same calm efficiency they had shown in battle. There were no celebrations, no triumphant parades, just a simple acknowledgement that the fighting was over. And then, said, they went back to being the species I saw in the field hospital, the species that heals its enemies, the species that shows mercy to those who tried to destroy them. He shook his head slowly. That is what terrifies me most. They can turn it on and off like a light switch. One moment, they are the most destructive force the galaxy has ever seen. The next moment, they are building hospitals and schools on the worlds they conquered. The journalist sat in stunned silence, finally spoke. What lesson did you take from all of this? She asked. Smiled. It was a sad, knowing smile. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a species that loves war. It is a species that hates war and fights anyway. A species that knows exactly what it is capable of and chooses, every day, to be something better. He rose from his chair, slowly and painfully. Humans do not want to be monsters. They work very hard to be kind. But if you force them to become monsters, They will be better at it than you can possibly imagine." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Remember that," he said. "When you write your histories and tell your stories, remember what humans truly are. Not demons, not angels, just people who carry both inside them and choose every moment which one to be." He walked out into the fading light of the old Capitol. The journalists watched him go, knowing they had heard something that would change the way their people understood the universe. Somewhere among the stars, humans were still out there, still choosing peace, still holding their monsters in chains. And the galaxy could only hope they never had reason to let them loose again.